In the 90s, the Beatles had their long-awaited reunion and returned with new songs in a multimedia series called Anthology. In this video, I will tell about all the stories behind this project and its new song released months ago. Hi, my name is Henrique Alves and this is Rick Resenha, a channel that talks about music from anytime and any place. Today I will talk about one of the most popular bands in the world, providing an overview since their breakup to the completion of the Anthology project, which was revived this year. By the end of the 60s, the Beatles had established themselves as one of the greatest bands in the world. However, as great its prestige was also the friction between members, at artistic and business levels. By this point, they tried to stay together longer than the public imagined, despite constant rumors about the band's imminent end. Following the release of the Beatles' latest album, Let It Be, a series of lawsuits were filed, starting with Paul McCartney demanding his release against the band's company Apple Corp. Despite legal fights that would only be resolved in 1975, the four members often collaborated on each of their projects but never together. Many managers would make million-dollar offers to make a concert, in the hope of seeing the Big Four together again. Unfortunately, the dream of thousands of fans around the world would end tragically with the murder of John Lennon in 1980. With the loss of one of the band's main voices and the constant collaborations between members, a new work with the band's name no longer made sense. The closest thing to a comeback was George Harrison's tribute to Lennon in 1981, releasing all those years ago, featuring Ringo on the drums and Paul and Linda McCartney on the backing vocals. Additionally, many compilations and special editions of the band were released, as the Beatles brand continued to be very profitable. Some of them had the band's blessing, but most were released under EMI and Capital Wishes, the publishing companies holding the Beatles' rights. This led to more legal disputes involving royalties and other business, with Paul McCartney in the center of the problem again. This time, Ringo, George, and Yoko, representing Lennon's business, reclaimed some royalty privileges that Paul had with EMI. The band's coming and goings with EMI provides content for an entire video, and if you are interested in that, ask me in the comments below, and please subscribe on my channel so you don't miss the next content. I'm releasing videos about music every week, or almost, but I'm trying hard. Now let's get back. In the 70s, there were two projects inside by Apple Corp with EMI and Capital, a documentary and a new album with unreleased songs. Both would become part of the Anthology project, and I will detail which one separately, because both documentary and album had different trajectories until they became the same project. Starting with the documentary, originally called The Long and Winding Road, in reference to the Let It Be track of the same name. Still in the 60s, the head of Apple Films, Dennis O'Dell, who directed films like A Hard Day's Night and Magic Mystery Tour, was already collecting video material for a future official Beatles documentary. The Apple Corp's executive Neil Aspinall was in charge of the project that would be released in late 1970. Also, an album containing songs from the Let It Be sessions could be released, even after the band's split was announced. Remember I said Paul had sued Apple? That was a month before this doc release, but with the situation worsening, the project was shelved. Apple announced in 1972 that they were producing a film called 10 Years in the Life of the Beatles. And that's all, because the film was never mentioned again. What John would later talk in an interview was about the previous title.
And there's a film in the offing that's comprised of all films we've collected from all the tours and all the interviews over the world that has been put together, which will be called The Long and Winding Road.
So the doc went back into production, and at that time something curious happened. Previously, the comedian Eric Idle had done a Beatles parody on his show Rutland Weekend Television, that became very popular when he brought the sketch on Saturday Night Live with Neil Innes, calling themselves as the Rutles. Then, a mockumentary about the band was commissioned by NBC called All You Need Is Cash. with the support of the SNL producer Lorne Michaels. George Harrison, who was a good friend of Eric and Neil, got interested in the project and provided them a copy of the last version of the Long and Winding Road documentary. The comedians not only recreated some unseen scenes but also used exclusive footage of the documentary on the film. At the end, All We Need sketch didn't receive the expected reception, as the public couldn't catch many jokes that they never had seen. Another situation that showed the doc was alive was one of the last John Lennon's statements. Against the unauthorized Broadway musical Beatlemania, he said,
"I and the other 3 former Beatles have plans to stage a reunion concert, an event to be filmed and included as the finale to The Long and Winding Road, the official Beatles produced documentary that is to be released in the mid-1980s.
But as we know, any planned activities would end with John gone, and that's the film part of the story. Before talking about the album part, I want to ask you to not forget to like the video so you can help me with my work to produce more videos about music and pop culture. As business never stopped, as soon as the morning passed, EMI planned another compilation. Recordings not officially released were picked to be remastered and would be included on sessions, with the promotional single Leave My Kidding Alone. The problem is that they didn't have the band's consent, and as you can imagine, they didn't approve and sued the label, making Sessions another never-released project. After years of dispute with Apple and EMI reaching an agreement in the 90s, a similar compilation album came in 1994 called Live at the BBC. It included performances broadcasted on BBC Radio between 1963 and 65, containing unreleased songs that had appeared before on bootlegs and radio series over the years. Most of them were covers due to the band's few original compositions in those years. Live at the BBC sold millions around the world and warmed up the audience for the big release that was about to come. In the early 90s, Neil Aspinall was in talk with the band and Yoko that was about time to the band's release that film documentary. Other reasons we can guess was the financial situation of George, with his broken handmade films and the trademark disputes between Apple Corp and Steve Jobs' Apple Inc. that encouraged more releases to warm up the Beatles brand. For the last documentary cut, the 3 members, known as the Tritos by the press, recorded some interviews with presenter Jools Holland, and the initial idea of using footage and voiceover narration as the main narrative remained. The long material was transformed into a mini-series called Anthology with 6-hour programs that aired on ITV on 3 nights in November 1995. An extended version was later released on VHS and DVD. A curious fact is that the first episode transmitted in the US on ABC could have had more audience if it wasn't for Princess Diana's interview about her divorce with Prince Charles on the other channels. In the process of finishing the doc, as the Beatles tapes were being revisited, an album collection of never-before-released material aside of Live at the BBC was planned to accompany the series. Not like the discarded sessions, the band was intimately involved in this project. In terms of curation, most of the tracks were from Abbey Road Studios archives, but some tapes were located with the help of some professionals, such as the historian Mark Levison, and some TV companies that the band had performed before. Many records from the early 60s were lost due to the EMI's poor policy, as they didn't know how successful the band would be. Memory preservation is something that few companies cared about. The recordings found included raw sessions, early demo versions, and live performances. George Martin and Geoff Emerick worked on the restoration of the songs, and with the 3 Beatles they chose over 600 recordings based on novelty and historical importance. One interesting thing about the production is that they maintaining the original formula, using old equipment and devices to not sound, as George said, modern and artificial. In total, 155 tracks were chosen to be divided into 3 albums, also called Anthology. Each one covers one period of the band. First, the formation to the fame ascension, the second between Help and the psychedelic phase, and the third, the final years. In the searching process, new songs would be made after Yoko provided some unused John Lennon's demo tapes from the late 70s, included songs such as Free as a Bird, Real Love, Grow Old With Me, and Now and Then. None of them with studio quality, just John singing and playing in his apartment using a mono recorder. Although personal and solo material, using these demos was the only way to the Fab Four united once again after John's death. Paul, Ringo, and George decided to complete the tracks in the studio and were helped by producer Jeff Lynne, an acquaintance of George. The sessions were held in McCartney's success studio, The Mill, for privacy reasons. With the technology of the time, they isolated John's voice to record additional vocals, played the instrumentation, and composed some new lines. 3 of those John's demos were sung No. Grow Old With Me had been included on Milk and Honey LP, and Real Love was included on the Imagine documentary soundtrack, while Free as a Bird was broadcasted on a US radio series called The Lost Lennon Tapes. From John's demos, only 2 songs were released. Free as a Bird as a single from the first Anthology album that came out with the premiere of the documentary series in 1995, and Real Love for the second album in 1996. In that same year, the third part was released but without any song from that reunion. The collage artwork for the album cover was made by Klaus Wurman, the same who created the Revolver cover in 1966. About the other session songs, Grow Old With Me was actually never considered to be remade, and Now and Then, which I will detail next, could not be properly restored. Also, a new Paul and George composition called All for Love was being reported, but apparently it didn't go well and they officially never talked about it. After the film and album, a new anthology media was released in 2000, an autobiographical book including rare photos and interviews, many of them transcripts from the documentary that were not shown. If you ask me if there was any bombastic revelation in the entire anthology series, I would say that besides some footage and demo versions, there was nothing much new, especially for the passionate collectors. The Beatles' history has always been very well documented, not just the historical events, but leaked recordings and demos circulated among fans for a long time. Also, any controversial aspects surrounding the band was mentioned. Still, our anthology formats was very successful and responsible for what we call the second Beatlemania wave. Adding to the cultural context, the global music industry was living at the peak of Britpop, a genre based on British alternative rock music that came to mainstream with bands such as Oasis, Blur, Pop, and Suede. It was also the soundtrack of the Cool Britannia movement, a renewal of the British pride inspired by the swing 60s. The Beatles, as a great source of inspiration for this movement, attracted the interest of a new audience that was being excited by the new releases and could learn more about them. Proof of the great interest in the band's work at the time was the One compilation released in 2000, today one of the best-selling records of all time, selling over 30 million copies. In this year, we had the recovery of Now and Then, a song that Paul always loved and which was shelved due to a persistent noise that could not be removed during the anthology sessions. The story of its rescue started in 2017 when Apple recruits the director Peter Jackson for a new cut of the documentary Let It Be, a film that includes the rooftop concert and the album recording sessions. In addition to the Lord of the Rings saga, Jackson had in his curriculum the historical documentary They Shall Not Grow Old, where his team created an image coloring and restoration software. For the so-called Get Back documentary, which was released as a series in 2021 on Disney+, they created another software based on machine learning to separate the sound of instruments and do better mixing. In practice, it was created an amazing restoration tool with track separation and sound isolation. With that, John Lennon's voices could be totally cleaned and the track Now and Then could be finished. So last year, Paul and Ringo got back to the studio to complete the track without George that passed in 2001. There is a story that George never liked the song, and the technological limitation wasn't the only reason to record Now and Then. Liking or not, today we have the song complete, and it came with a new remixed version of the Red and Blue compilation set. Peter Jackson also directed a music video, and there is an interesting mini doc on YouTube explaining the Now and Then making of. And that's the story of the anthology. When I started researching about it, I didn't have idea of how complicated it was. But I think the biggest explanation is that clarifies why the band took so long to get back and release something. I doubt any fan doesn't know any of this, but I hope anyone who's watched my video so far has learning a new information. Links and references are in the pinned comment. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next videos. See you!